Okay, welcome everyone. This is WeHo Reads Exploration Beyond Borders. My name is Cody Cisco. I am your host for tonight, and I'm just gonna need to mute something so it doesn't echo in my own ears, so give me 1 second. My name is Cody Cisco. I am your host for tonight, and I'm just gonna need to mute something so it doesn't echo in my own ears, so give me 1 second. Here we go. It's one of the most disorienting things to hear your own voice echo back to you. Okay, here we're now good. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see our participants tonight. Welcome, everyone. And it is so good to see you. Tonight, we're going to be taking you to different places via fiction and poetry. And I had a whole prepared thing. So one thing that we're doing tonight, and I'm very honored to be able to create a space for this, is to have Gloria Arellanes to read a land acknowledgement that is in line with the City of West Hollywood's land acknowledgement policy. So Gloria, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. Hello to everybody that's joining us. My name is Gloria Arellanes. I am a Gabrielino Tongva Alder Chicana, and I'm going to talk about our lands. And I'm not reading anything. I always depend on the ancestors and my spirituals to give me the words. So, this is what I will say. I have been, I'm considered a grandmother, which is an honor in Native culture. And I carry a lot of wisdom and knowledge, so they say. But my obligation is to share that knowledge and obligation as an elder, because if I don't share it, then it goes with me when I pass on, and the information is lost. So I've been mentored for a very long time from elders, and I'm still learning. I learn every day. I hope to learn every day. That's important. And I'm going to share some things about the land. Okay, in the land acknowledgement, I read what the City of West Hollywood has. Very long, a lot of research, and I appreciate that. However, I have a different perspective because I have obligations to the land as a Native and Tongva woman of this area. So to begin with, Tovangna was our whole world. And that comes from Tongva, as you can hear it in there. Apparently the name Tongva came from Tongve, a village that was close to where the San Gabriel Mission is. And that was considered more or less Sibagna, and that's where a lot of activities happen. But in our culture, we didn't have one nation and one chief. We had villages, and each village had their own consul and chief and different societies. So in looking at the languages, not everybody spoke one kind of language. We had variations. I was just reading something yesterday about there was 4 languages at the San Gabriel Mission. So because each village had its own leader and consul, we didn't have one chief. So we have a lot of different groups that say they're Gabrielino / Pimuet. That means Catalina, Pimu. And so forth. In Tataviam, the San Fernando Mission has a tribe there, and they follow, they're Gabrielino. And Gabrielino was given to us by the Spanish. So what we were before that was according to what our village was. So, but since I would say the 1800s, we've been able to document the Tongva name and know that it came from San Gabriel in that area. And we had a chief, Sparky Morales, for 43 years. And when he passed, his son took over, Anthony Morales, who is now, he prefers to be called chairman rather than chief. And that was a hereditary kind of way to pass on that leadership. And what happened when we were in the mission church having the service for Sparky, there was a chief there that was very close to us, Bob Rivera from the Shumash people. And when the Catholic ceremony was done, the Tongva had their own ceremony. And in that ceremony, Chief Rivera passed a feather, an eagle feather, to Anthony Morales, and that made him the chief of the Tongva people. So it was done with ceremony in the traditional old way. Even though we were in a church, we did our own thing in a way. We had our own songs, we sang songs and took our clapper sticks. We didn't use a drum. We're not drum people. We use clapper sticks, we use rattles. And rattles were made from seashells, from seeds, rocks, pebbles inside of something that would, a gourd that would make a noise. And so going back to our land, I try to take people back to try to imagine what pure land looks like. We don't see too much of that these days. So I try to take back, for whatever memories are given to me, to know that our land was pure, it was perfect. It gave us everything that we needed: clothing, food, medicine, shelter, everything we could need. And we were very logical people, nothing like the people today. We were dependent on Walmarts and going to stores, ordering on Amazon. Very, very different. So I wonder, because I was always taught, when you sing your songs, you have to make them correct because the ancestors will not recognize it. So I wonder what they think of us these days. Do they recognize us still? I feel their presence, and when I go to sacred sites, I feel them, but I guess when I'm on the freeway, they probably say, what is this? What is this? I don't get it. I don't understand. What happened? What happened to our people? So the land was pure. We were not a warring kind of tribe, although we did have uprisings with Toy Purina. She was a young female medicine woman that was going to fight the mission because our whole world was being disrupted. We were taken from where we lived. We were put in holding centers and told we could not speak our language or do our ceremonies or pray the way we had prayed for centuries. And our villages are as old as 15,000 years old. We've been around for a very, very, very long time. I've read some of the archaeology books. I've worked at Poza Chica and Puguna, which is Cal State Long Beach. And that's where our center of emergence was, at Long Beach. So we came to be who we are today through somebody who gave us all our rituals and our ceremony and our regalia, our language. When the missions came, they tried to take all that away and made our children cut their hair, couldn't pray in their language, couldn't speak their language. And we know what happened with some of these boarding schools, what happened to the children now. At last count, it was over 5,000 children they have found buried that were tortured through various churches. I do not forgive that action, because a lot of these were churches. So going back to the land, we had this perfect land until, we didn't war with people. We had territories, but we were able to travel wherever we wanted. There was no borders. Okay, so your title today is very apropos. It's a beautiful way to celebrate. No borders. There's a saying, we didn't cross the borders crossed us. So when we do our genealogy, we're finding we came from Baja California up to the port of Los Angeles. There was a lot of migrations. So when people say, well, you're not, you're Mexican, let's say, okay, so what? Okay, I am proud to say my dad was Mexican and my mom was a Tongva. And now that I'm doing a lot of genealogy, we're finding some roots into another Southern California tribe I will not be able to announce until I'm positive. Okay. But I am Tongva. Yeah. And, my family goes way, way back. We have burials up at the Santa Barbara Mission, so you can imagine how we migrated. Yeah. Yeah. So, Gloria, thank you. Okay. Oh, you're welcome. So, anyways.
There's I think you've given us a perfect start to today's discussions. And I think this idea of what does a world without borders look like? What does the land look like in our lifetime, but in our memory? And I just want to thank you for being here today, and for honoring us, and for teaching us and reminding us of what joy can look like.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
And to your point about, recollection and memory and the land, one thing I'd like to start with, and what I've asked our authors to start with tonight as they introduce themselves, will be recollections of where they've come from, where they've traveled to, and to put us in those places, to help us see them, to help us smell and hear and feel them. And so I think that you set that out perfectly for us here, and thank you for your time and for doing that.
You're welcome.
We're going to hear from Myriam J. Chancy first. Her novel, What Storm, What Thunder, came out last year, I believe. And Miriam, why don't you bring us back to your recollection and memories?
Sure. Thank you, Cody, and thank you, Gloria, for that wonderful setting in where we are right now, which is in southern LA. I'm originally from Haiti, from Port-au-Prince, and my novel, What Storm, What Thunder, is about the 2010 earthquake, and that's what I'll be reading from later in the program. I was trying to think of what I could share, because there's so much to share about Haiti. We have Taino Arawak heritage, we have African heritage, European heritage. And I was thinking about, well, what do I think about when I think about home? And I was reminded about how artful the communities are in Haiti. A friend of mine who runs the Hollywood Haiti Film Festival, Jacques Constant, has a film that just was accepted at the Cannes Film Festival. And the film is called Haiti is a Nation of Artists. And I remember in the early 2000s, there was a CNN piece talking about how Haiti has more visual artists, painters, than any country in Latin America. And I was stunned, but not too surprised, because Haitian painting is very distinctive. And so that made me think of when I went back to Haiti in 2011, so a year after the earthquake, and I visited a community in the island off the coast of Haiti called La Gonave, which also suffered some casualties, out-migration from Port-au-Prince to Haiti. And of course, people left Haiti and have been leaving Haiti in droves, because so much of the aid that was intended for Haiti has not helped the average Haitian, so that Haitians have been migrating to places as far as Suriname and Brazil and Chile, of course, to neighboring Dominican Republic, but also as close to us on the US-Mexico border, as you might have seen, it's in September. But when I went to La Gonave, I visited a community that I've known since the 90s called Art Matenois. It's a collective of Haitian women artists who have taken to painting scarves, and I'm wearing one today, where they paint Veliz, which is part of the spirituality, Vodou in Haiti, which is a syncretic Catholic and African spirituality. And, really educate people about how much we've lost, but also how much we know in terms of healing, herbalism. And when I went there, the first thing they did was to set a big spread. And this is a very poor community where people make about $50 every 3 to 4 months, and share what they make with the community. So I just wanted to share about the ways in which, even though Haiti is a poor country, they're very rich in art and resourcefulness, and doing their work in collectivity, which we call a combit. So I'll put that in the chat, the term, and maybe also the link to Art Matenois. And that's my recollection for today.
Thank you, Miriam. We'll look for those, and get to travel a little bit virtually tonight. Teresa Mei Chuc is a poet and author of Red Thread, which we'll be reading from tonight. But for now, Teresa, if you might mind introducing yourself and telling us your recollections.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you, Mama Gloria, for your land acknowledgement. I was born in Saigon, Vietnam, shortly after the American War in Vietnam. In Vietnam, we call the war the American War, and here we call it the Vietnam War. After the war, my father was taken to a Viet Cong re-education camp where he spent 9 years, and my mother took my brother and I on a refugee boat with over 2,500 refugees. And we fled the country. We spent 3.5 months in the South China Sea. Our boat's engines stopped working, and the UN did an investigation, and we were able to resettle to different countries. And my mother, brother, and I came here to Tongva land, to Tavangar, as a refugee. So I'm very grateful. I feel like I tread multiple worlds because I'm Vietnamese and also part Cantonese, and I grew up here in Cajamonga, Pasadena area. And a lot of my writing has to do with making sense of the world, making sense of the war, and its impact on my motherland, the people there, the land, the water, the animals, and also on us in the diaspora, the impact of war and how it continues through generations. And I look forward to reading about my experiences through my poetry and sharing with everybody.
Thank you, Teresa. And I look forward to hearing more of your poetry. Thanks. Lisbeth, would you like to take us? Well, where are we going with you, Lisbeth?
Okay, you have to stop me because you know I'm a bubblehead. And those who know me know I was born and raised in Venezuela, where I lived for 32 years. I'm also a Canadian citizen and an American citizen. I carry my land with me. I haven't visited my homeland in almost 20 years now. And not a day goes by that I don't relive images of my country. It's a longing that cannot be filled with anything. And I have daily reminders of the exuberant land of my youth. There is no place on earth compared to this nature paradise, where people don't go to look for cathedrals or museums or interesting archaeological sites, but when you visit Venezuela, you visit for nature. Exuberant, luscious, rich nature. It's an incredibly rich country in minerals and natural resources. And unfortunately, in the last 20 years has failed to a regime with the administrative scheme of a narco cartel, and is extremely brutal in repression of dissidents, and it's hard to get out and hard to get in. And from here, I mourn the country that I will never see again. And from here, I have to do my best to support those close to my heart that are still inside. What else can I tell you? I come from the most beautiful place on earth.
Thank you. And we'll be hearing more of your poems from your poetry book, Uprising, Alzamiento, a little bit later. So I'm looking forward to that. And now I believe Sehba is going to take us perhaps both to Pakistan and Houston, but we'll see. She's going to share a photo with us as well. And Sehba, where are you taking us today?
Well, when I think of home, I think of Karachi, and these are two pictures from my blog that I posted in February, and I had just gotten back from Karachi. I have a new relationship with travel at this point in my life, and the picture on the left is the beach, Sandspit Beach, where we used to go as children, where we go every time. In wintertime is the time to go to the beach. You can't really swim in the summer, so winter you go, and so there's the man with the camel who my nieces had just ridden on, and then the cart with the cob, corn on the cob, which you all know, but it's very different. It's roasted cob. Then you get it with masala, red masala. And on the right is a picture of my cousins, my siblings, and my mother, who's holding her hand up with henna on it, as you can see, because we all were in Karachi for my cousin's son's wedding, and we are all like siblings. So it was an emotional trip because we had not reunited for more than 2 years. So, and this was the first time that my siblings brought our daughters together in my parents' home. So everybody had met before in the US or in different spots, but this was the first time we gathered in Karachi together. And so there was music, there was partying, there was festivity, and there was Omicron. My mother got it. I got it when I got back, and a few family elders who had been suffering with other ailments passed away also over the course of the month. So there was sadness, but the wedding was like this fire, and it was this warm bonfire, not a California fire, not a Santa Ana fire, but a warm bonfire that we gathered around and just enjoyed love and family and music and food, of course. And so that's where I'll read an essay. Today I'm going to read an essay and an excerpt from Blackwing. So you'll get to revisit a little bit of that through the prose I read. And that's my blog, by the way. So I'll put the link in the chat. So you can read it. I have a list there of things that I just loved, but I won't read that. You can go get it.
Fantastic. Thank you. What strikes me about what we've heard thus far is this inextricable mixture of joy and sorrow, and how memory helps us travel there, but nothing's like being there in person, which we've all missed for a very long time. I don't know if you have any reflections on each other's stories or recollections thus far. I know that it looks like Lisbeth and Miriam have to get together. I think it was that around the Canadian and the Canadian aspect.
We're both Canadian and American citizens, but originally from another country, a third country.
Similar life paths. Well, I want to rush us along because I do want to hear from each of these writers. So I'm going to take care of the business part of this event, which is where I express my deep gratitude to the City of West Hollywood for presenting WeHo Reads and for creating this platform for culture, which we have all cherished so much over the years, and especially during the pandemic. And as well to the other organizations that have provided support for this program, including the UCLA Extension Writers Program, which is a vital resource for writers in the area and now even beyond, as well as Poets and Writers, which has made a mini grant available in support of this program. We have media partners as well. If you want to buy and read any of the books by our participating writers, Book Soup is our local bookstore partner located in West Hollywood. I heard they have a new bookstore puppy that they just got. And so that might be a good reason to go down and say hello and introduce yourself to the staff and the puppy and buy a few books. We're also grateful to bookshop.org, which supports local indie bookstores around the country and abroad. And finally, the LA Review of Books, which is a homegrown and very important source of criticism for the Los Angeles literary scene. So those are the thank yous. I would like to pass it over to Mike Che from the City of West Hollywood Arts Division. And Mike, you're here, are you?
I am here. Hello. Hi. I'd like to just say welcome on behalf of the City of West Hollywood. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your stories. You know, the City of West Hollywood is very small. It's only 1.9 square miles. So definitely traveling beyond the borders is important. And I'm from New York myself, born of Chinese parents. And I would always travel. I was an armchair traveler. I would read books and travel that way for many years. So I'm very curious to hear all of your readings. Thank you to Cody, of course, for organizing and producing this year's season of WeHo Reads. We have a great lineup that he's put together. The next one is going to be in June, and it'll also be part of our WeHo Pride LGBTQ Arts Festival. So please join us for that. You can find out more information at weho.org/WeHo Reads and at pride.weho.org. I will put those in the chat for you. But yeah, thank you to all of our readers and everyone who's attending today. And let's just get on and listen to some wonderful art. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And so I am looking forward to more discussion as well, because I think these authors have a lot to say on the topic of joy in the midst of sorrow. And first, we are going to hear from Miriam, who's going to read for us right now.
Yes, thank you, Cody. So I'm going to read from What Storm, What Thunder, which is a novel about the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. More than 300,000 people perished in that earthquake in 45 seconds. 1.7 million people were left home insecure and food insecure. There was another very large earthquake in August of last year. Over 2,000 people died in that earthquake, and over another 1 million people were left home and food insecure. And in 2022, sadly, you know, those who suffered through the 2010 earthquake are still in conditions of disrepair, whether it's their home or, you know, their grief over those that they've lost. And so what I tried to do in this novel, which was a novel that I was not going to write, but ended up, you know, starting to write in 2013 and then was published in the fall of last year, was to try to bring to the reader a sense of what it might have felt like to be there in 2010 on the ground, but also for people like me who have intimate ties to Haiti, what it would have felt like to be outside of Haiti and to witness this from afar. So the novel is told in 10 narrative voices, only one of whom repeats, which is Malou, a market woman. And you visit with individuals from 3 family groups. One group is our siblings, and you hear from 3 of them. And then there is Malou, her estranged son, who is a multimillionaire, but doesn't have anything to do with his mother, and his natural daughter, Anne, who is grown by the time you meet her in the novel and is an architect working in Rwanda. And then finally, you have a family of very young parents who lose their toddler children and are about to lose their 3rd son. And I'm going to read from one of those characters. Her name is Sarah, so the mother in this family. And I suppose the thing to say about the novel is that though it might be painful for some readers to read about these experiences, part of what writing a novel does is to offer you the possibility of meeting the characters on your own, you know, in your own way, in your own time. And one of the reasons I wrote the novel in several voices was to not only give the reader a sense of the variety of experiences during the earthquake, because when tragedies strike in the news cycle, we tend to only hear about a mass of people. And we don't really think about individuals or families or communities. But I also wanted to give the reader places to pause, because a story like Sarah's is very difficult, for example, but then you can rest and then you can get into the next story. But all of the stories are interconnected. All the chapters are interconnected. So I'm just going to read a brief passage from Sarah, and it'll give you a sense also of the spiritual dimension that Haitians experience in their culture, because she is experiencing the possibility that one of her children is visiting her as she struggles with the grief in internally displaced people's camp of trying to stay alive for her last child while her husband has moved on to another camp in the hopes of finding work, which was a promise made in 2010. So this is Sarah. When the tugging started on her right elbow, as she slept folded in on herself, as she used to sleep, that image of all of them growing old together had begun to fade. She had begun to forget what each of them looked like, not because dues had happened so long ago. Was it now only a few months ago, six months ago? It seemed so much longer, but because the shock of their sudden disappearance had broken something in her mind, the part that was able to take things in and let them go, that wanted for little more than she had. The violence of this loss was like nothing she had ever experienced before, not like her parents' departures or her grandmother waving goodbye to her as she climbed into the back of her aunt and uncle's four-wheel drive, where she sat between two of the cousins, their sweaty thighs touching stickily together in the heat, forming an unexpected bond in place of the tearing away from all that she had held dear and familiar. The morning of the event, she remembered they were there, eating breakfast, fighting over something that would soon be forgotten. They went off to school, hair combed or plaited, looking smart in their school clothes. They came home from school, washed up, changed into play clothes, did their homework, then asked for permission to go play with their friends as they waited for Olivier to return home and sit down to dinner. She'd said yes, as she almost always did. Why had she said yes? Why hadn't she been stricter, as Olivier had started to insist that she be? Out they went, little arms flailing in that smooth devil-may-care way that only children have, miniature dancers with hidden internal choreographers named happiness and simplicity, love. That's what they were, love in movement, her love, Olivier's, all the world's love, wrapped up in their little fists, pumping through the air, feet following, drumming the earth for joy. Jonas, their oldest, she'd sent to get an egg from Malou, the old woman in the market who doted on her son as if he were her own, sent him to and from the market to run errands for other clients when she could spare him. He loved the attention, feeling grown. But the boy had turned 11, though he had been a brooding 10, going on 11, a ruminator like his father. He was often distracted as he made his way to and from the market, counting his steps in every direction that he went. Televisions and radios caught his attention, other children from school, or the market women themselves with their téléjol and tall tales. He listened to it all and sometimes reported back. He loved to tell her about the soap opera named Frijolito, or Little Bean, which everyone liked to watch at a house down the road from them. The house of a woman whose name she didn't know, but who had a sullen-looking nephew who had helped her to install a used television in her living room that she turned toward a window so that neighbors could watch too. She didn't watch telenovelas, didn't have any use for them. And what did romance have to do with little beans anyway? That day, she told him to come right back with the egg. She needed it to strengthen a thin soup, was already imagining the filaments of egg beaten and swirled into the broth, thickening it to a lustrous yellow. Why had he not done as she'd asked that day? Come right back with the egg. Why had he dallied and gone to take a peek at the soap opera with the neighborhood children? Why had he entered the house rather than stood outside like the others? Because he was too short, this she knew. So always minced his way through alcoves and door jambs, but still she asked herself the questions over and over again, as if the answers might come back differently, though they never did. Why had he always, like her husband, his father, been as distracted by everything around him? Why couldn't he stay on a straight path? She thought this now, lying on the cot, knowing that if Olivier, her husband, had stayed on a straight path, one that would have brought him greater wealth, maybe better class standing, they might have never made the children who all were gone. Maybe this was why she asked the question, why, if they had never met, which would have been better? The tug insistent in the middle of the night. She had turned to the darkness next to her, inches above the ground, and said to it, please, please leave. Then turned her head back against the thin mattress she had been given in the camp by some act of grace, because she'd come there with nothing more than the stitch of clothes on her back, a headdress, some flat-heeled shoes, a ribbon from one of their daughters' heads. Had she come alone? Her children came to define her. Not even Olivier had been able to mark her in that way. They taught her who she was and who she wanted to be. Something more than a mother, something of a divine, an intermediary between heaven and earth, the vessel that brought them from over there to here, who'd made flesh out of spirit. They made her believe in holy things for a time until they all disappeared in a matter of seconds. And the miracles that they were became dust, leaving her above ground only to preach about their passage, a passage she no longer believed in and for which she refused to testify. That's sad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. We'll talk more about Haiti a little bit later, but we also want to share some organizations that are doing important relief work and humanitarian work in Haiti. So we'll put those links in the chat. Those also appear on Miriam's website. Thank you. Next, we have Teresa.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you, Cody. So I'm going to take everyone back to the time of the war. At this moment, I tell my stories so that it can create bridges of understanding. So first, this first poem is about when my mother was in the bomb shelter and she was pregnant with me. So I'm taking you back to the womb. The bomb shelter. When bombs are exploding outside, it means that there are implosions. Vibrations travel through air and liquid. My amniotic fluid is imprinted with airplanes dropping bombs and screams and fire. In the bomb shelter in Saigon, my father teaches my 2-year-old brother French. Je m'appelle Juknai Dat. Je m'appelle. These poems are based on true stories. Immigration. It is October when the winds of autumn blow strong in the Pacific. There are over 2,000 of us, sardines, barely human and starving. We sleep on the floor and wash ourselves with seawater. People are sick. When someone dies from sickness, she or he is wrapped in a blanket and tossed overboard during a Buddhist chant. I was only 2 years old and cannot recollect the dying next to me, nor can I recollect my constant coughing, nor can I recall seeing my mother's worried countenance as she contemplated our future, how my constant crying made her want to jump overboard. Cockroaches. A proposal by someone to my mom after the Vietnam War. Why don't you sell your baby? You don't have anything to eat. A response by my 4-year-old brother. No, don't sell my sister. There are lots of cockroaches for us to eat. When I returned to the country 18 years later, I saw them, large, brown, shiny tanks on the wall, evidence of my brother's love for me. This poem I wrote for my children. Photosynthesis. How can I convince you that you do have chlorophyll, that you can take the sun's energy and turn it into sugar, produce something sweet inside of you, take the waste people breathe out and make it into something that will keep you alive, that will keep those around you alive. Create oxygen. Why do you say that this metaphor doesn't work? That you don't have the powers of a plant? That nature didn't intend you that way? Look how you twist and turn towards the light. This poem is about the first time I saw my father. He had spent 9 years in a Viet Cong re-education camp. He fought in the army of the Republic of Vietnam, the South Vietnamese army. When I first saw Daddy, he was like an Egyptian cat, skinny, foraging, and stern, just released from a Viet Cong prison. He told us he hated the color red. 16 years later, he wears a red sweatshirt and smiles, the pin tip opening in his heart enough to let in a driblet of red. This next poem is about my name. Accents. Today, I decided to write with brush and ink my name in Vietnamese, Chuc Mi Due, the one on my birth certificate with all of its beautiful accents. Lightning above the U, ocean wave above the Y, mountaintop above and reflection of moon below the E. Today, I made 4 small marks and took back my native language. This poem is about the impact of the chemicals that the US used on the rainforest in Vietnam. The decade the rainforest died, the deer did not stop running. Leopards climbed into trees that could not hide them. The Dudlanker and the white-cheeked gibbon cursed at the metal gods we flew, raining on them as they burned from napalm. Elephants choked on the smoke of gunpowder and poison, their steps a strange rhythm as they tried to fly. The thunder of bombs echoed the steps of elephants. Tigers exploded as they stepped onto landmines. In a forest covered with leaves, dead from Agent Orange, fallen trees, and decomposing bodies of animals and people, the earthworms were washed away in monsoons with soil that could no longer grab onto roots. The Javan rhinoceros and the wild water buffaloes that were still alive wandered aimlessly. Weary, with M16s and AK-47s, we marched silently and steadily, not knowing why we were killing each other. So in Vietnam, there's still a lot of unexploded landmines. And this poem is about the people that go and risk their lives to find and detonate these unexploded landmines, UXO. The gambler. The metal rod she holds is her wand. The deck is more than 52 cards. Her suits, bombs used on both sides of the war. She walks in the wild fields, seeking the invisible, bringing it to the surface in a strange beauty of smoke and explosion. The wager is her life or limb, the shovel, a tongue that lifts the crumbling earth to reach an unexploded landmine. She spreads out the dirt beneath her hands like cards. A lot of people are familiar with Agent Orange, but another chemical used is called Agent Blue, which affected the food supply. It was created by the US military to destroy the rice. Agent Blue. To kill correctly takes calculation, down to a science. Arsenic, cacodyllic acid, no water and rice on a cellular level. Make sure no surviving seed can be collected and planted, because even a small seed assures survival, because mortars, grenades, and bombs cannot destroy a grain, because our heart is made of seeds. Know what it takes to kill the seeds. Know what it takes to deprive the plant of water, to dehydrate it, to be surrounded by love, but unable to absorb it. This next poem I wanted to share brings us closer to home. So the poems I previously shared were from the time of the war, and now we're here in Chabangar. Spring poem. The flowers are blooming, and so are the bruises on her face, purple and pink like showy penstemon, and there is nowhere she could go. The bruises on her arm, the deep violet of prickly pear fruits, tender to the touch. The flowers are blooming around her tent on the hillside, overlooking the freeway. Sunflowers, each branch carrying light. The robins, mockingbirds, and blue jays are singing as his fist punches her. The flowers are blooming, fuchsia red, fairy duster red on her skin, and there is nowhere she could go. This poem is dedicated to our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, and daughters experiencing houselessness. I wanted to end with this poem to take us to the spaces of emptiness. In praise of emptiness, I am looking for what's not there, that space we look through, the curve of a bowl, a window, blankness on paper, the smooth white between words, between lines, what is not said, what is not done, the hollow in a bird's bones. When someone looks at my palms, it's as if I'm holding nothing but the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you. What you're hearing in my voice is a little bit of having trouble speaking, but I saw also in the chat that Lisbeth says your poem about the cockroaches makes her cry every time. Thank you for those. And we'll be chatting more about the legacy of colonialism and war, especially later on. So next, Lisbeth, you're up.
I want to share the screen a little.
Okay, let me do some quick magic and let's see. Okay, now you should be able to share.
Oh, now it's not there. Okay, let me try again.
Should be a little green
There you
box.
go. Okay.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to illustrate a little. Most of my poetry, especially in Uprising, Alzamiento, especially in Uprising, Alzamiento, is based on images from the internet, because you all know I don't go back to my country. I cannot go back easily. And I write almost ekphrastic poems from the war that's going on back home. So the images get to me through my childhood neighbors and through my siblings, and that's how I write my poetry. So this is the images that accompany the shield, one of the opening poems of the collection. The shield. A festive and brave woman, she built me to protect her youngest at the edge of the abyss. She carved me from wood to honor the crucifixion, covered me with the gold abundant under her feet, crafted an anchor for the battle from worn belt buckles. Her ingenuity shines on the humble lids of garbage bins and the urban skateboards, shielding her offspring in the battle against the impostor. The warm winds of the Caribbean dry the blood on my face. The skateboard falls down the hill. A head cracks against barricade. The lid rattles on the ground when it falls. I hold my place, my body shaking against the ammunition, rubber pellet, poke-marked eyes with a dark future. Tear gas storms over her children. Uprising. And this is the title poem of the collection. A human river floods Avenida Libertadora and Avenida Bolívar. Pubescent bodies shake behind makeshift shields and masks fashioned from plastic bottles and rags. A violinist and a ballerina perform in front of an armored vehicle. After the musician is captured, his face is rendered unrecognizable. Emaciated souls march single file along the Andes, border crossings, rivers swelling with descent and desertion. Voices rise to describe dystopia in 100-second languages. Keyboard warriors tweet the sorrow of a woman carrying the limp body of her teenage daughter. Okay, I don't know how to do that. Bloggers comment on seniors lining up for a ration of rice with added bugs for protein. Journalists report of nocturnal dances around currency bonfires. A rezandera wrestles with the oxymoron of an oil-rich country without gasoline. A spring meets the silhouette of two men. Courage is marked by chain bracelets around their wrists. Eyes hold the images of darkness, future, torture, isolation. Eyes retreat to see the bright future of a nation slowly climbing the upward slope of freedom. And now I take all these disturbing images from you. I'm sorry, I disturb your afternoon. Now I'm going to read something I wrote for my parents on my 55th birthday. Newton's second law of motion. Learning the laws of letting go, excavating trauma, medicating trauma, thinking forgiveness inhabits a kingdom for which I bear no passport nor entry visa, while holding the past with both hands folded over chest, a survival trophy, until his mother's voice says, your father weighs 112 pounds. Or brother's WhatsApp reads, I was able to bring them water today. They had no electricity for a week. Till no solid ground exerting a force equal to the weight of my resentment can hold your feeble legs in the line of a monthly ration. And that's from Uprising, Alzamiento. And what is this nonsense in my... Okay, can you see it now? That was from Uprising, Alzamiento, my poetry collection dedicated to the freedom of my homeland. And now I'm going to read a couple of poems from my upcoming collection, Parchita Passion Poetry, that is going to be published early next year by World Stage Press. And because I want to also remind everybody today that we are in May Mental Health Awareness Month, and I am an outspoken consumer of mental health services. To put it nicely, I'm crazy, to put it bluntly. And also the last poem I'm going to dedicate to the struggle for reproductive choices. So the last two poems. I used to be a medicated woman, angry because I always got the short stick no matter how many times we drew. The abusive mother who wanted to test the purity between my legs, a piñata for 5 brothers, the tumor on my skin that will never kill me nor go away, permanent bathroom cleaning duties in a family of 9, my menarche present. Take a pill. I used to be a medicated woman, frustrated because I couldn't fit the square husband into the multiple triangles of my marriage, the mother-in-law finding stains in my character with the tip of her index finger on my furniture, the TN2 visa, no social security number, no work permit, a housewife of the 50 in the 21st century, a brown Martha Stewart minus the command of my life. Take a pill. I used to be a medicated woman, disoriented because I couldn't keep up with all the addresses and faces in each new neighborhood, the packing and unpacking of so many relocations, couldn't keep up with all the teachers, doctors, supermarkets names, nor could I remember in which box I buried the book I was writing, nor the files of my poetry or the pictures of my children when they were babies. Take a pill. I used to be a medicated woman, depressed because I couldn't find dignity in the ocean view of my marital bedroom, couldn't believe I had forgotten to love myself, couldn't afford a lawyer, didn't have a friend to call to talk shit about the bastard, my in-laws, my mother, even God. Take a pill. I used to be a medicated woman, unemployed because I lost 10 years without identity in a country that need not welcome me, nor my skin color, my accent, my political views, my lack of faith. The best years of my professional life is spent in the never-ending cycle of obtaining a teaching license at every new location, always the first-year teacher, always under observation. Take a pill. I used to be a medicated woman, medicated because I was unable to control my emotions, unable to put ground under my feet, unable to pull myself together without a pill. Take all these pills. I am no longer a medicated woman. Beware, because I am coming after you, the abusive parent, the in-law families of Mercury and Lead, the patriarchy and the bigotry, the dictators and the demagogues, the hypocrisy of your faith. Beware, this keyboard spits fire, not pills. And last, shorter, Why the Nightingale Sings. It is dedicated to Dawn Wooten, the nurse who blew the whistle on the hysterectomies performed on IC detainees in a camp in Georgia. At the top of an ebony tree, in the forest of our shared pains, a nightingale sings a lament for our brown self thrown against each other in the novel virus spreading vortex of dark ages. Lament for our uteri bleeding after rape, after the agony of having children taken away, dysmenorrhea, the red agony of exhausted ovaries swallowing daily cocktails of misogyny and xenophobia inside an ICE concentration camp. On surgical tables, healthy ovaries mistaken for cystic ones, them both removed from semi-etherized female brown women, unable to refuse treatment, unable to understand their fruitless futures of muted mamas, abuelas, brown women unable to stand up for their own humanity, brown children taken away with the precision of a scalpel, forever unconceivable here or there, even when sent back to where they came from. On top of an ebony tree, in the forest of our shared pains, the nightingale sings in the dawn of our uprising. Thank you very much, Cody, for inviting me. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Lisbeth. I am so excited about your forthcoming book of poetry.
Thank you.
So 2023, we'll be looking for that from World Stage Press. And obviously people should get Uprising Alzamiento as well. A beautiful cover. Thank you, Lisbeth. And we will now hear from Sehba Sarwar, the author of Black Wings. And I think you said you also maybe you were going to read from some memoir in progress tonight. Is that right?
I did say that, but I think I'm going to shift a little bit and actually read from an essay that I wrote in February that appeared in the Los Angeles Times. And I'm a big believer that writing comes alive after you read it. So I have not read this piece out loud. It appeared in print and it appears online and it can be found, but for me to own it, I have to read it. And I just want to thank all the writers before me. Each of you is so powerful and always love each of your works. So I'm just so grateful for the Los Angeles literary community. And Cody, thanks for inviting us and me. And I think that this has just been such a wonderful series. I want to thank my student, Mindy Garza, also, who joined us today. Thank you, Mindy, and others. This essay was published on February 19th, and it's actually connected to the opening image that I shared of Karachi. I am transnational, and my parents were born in India, and they migrated to Pakistan, and we're slowly shifting to the US, but we have roots in multiple places, and to the point where it is very difficult for us to go back to our parents. When I say my sibling and I, we cannot go back to our mother's home country very easily, to India. And I'm grateful that for now, I can move between nations. I can go to Pakistan and I can take my daughter with me. And she's been many times. Because of the pandemic, everything froze. So this essay I wrote after coming back from Karachi in January. My Chicana and it's dedicated to my Chicana South Asian daughter, finding her roots in Karachi and in Houston, Texas. You are South Asian, I tell my daughter, Minal, 100%. And you are also 100% Chicana. You are both. Minal, a junior at a Pasadena public high school, rolls her eyes. After 2 years of isolation during the pandemic and our family's recent relocation to a city where we have no family and are only just forming community, she is far from her roots. My husband, Renee, and I have tried to pass down a global consciousness that links her dual identities. She has attended international baccalaureate and Spanish immersion schools, and family on both sides are a big influence. In a recent essay that she wrote about her family history, she concluded that both her parents' ancestors experienced displacement in their lives because of colonization. During many dinnertime conversations in my parents' house in Karachi, Pakistan, she has heard my parents, my journalist sister, and a spate of guests discuss politics. She too counts as a product of the feminist and agnostic home in which I was raised. And my mother, a veteran educator, is a regular visitor to our Los Angeles home. Renee, my husband, is a Chicano from the Texas Rio Grande Valley, where his family remained for generations, even as the border shifted between Texas and Mexico. His older sister, one of the pioneers of Chicana literary criticism, begins family meals that are often Tex-Mex or Chinese takeout by dedicating gatherings to women and to indigenous communities. Renee and I met in Austin. I had not planned to remain in the US after finishing graduate school, but I connected with Renee. Our worldviews and our family histories were forged by shifting borders and displacement. We created community in Houston, where we lived for 20 years before moving to Pasadena for work. As a transnational, someone with homes across borders, I remain close to my family in Karachi, where I don't have to explain my identity. However, in the US, the superficiality of skin color and the assumptions that people make about one is real. Once in Houston, when Minal was 2, I was talking on my cell phone while pushing her stroller. A white woman yelled at me, perhaps thinking I was Minal's nanny. "Get off your phone and take care of the baby." More recently, I was with 2 writer friends in an outdoor cafe in Mid-Street, LA. A woman walked up to us. Her eyes were pinned on me, and she commented on how she liked my t-shirt that read, "Resistencia, Poets Against Walls," a writers collective in South Texas. Then she asked, "Where are you from?" I told her that I had moved to LA from Houston. "No, where are you really from?" she pushed. My friends cringed for me. One had parents from Czechoslovakia and Ecuador. The other is Hawaiian with Irish and Japanese roots. But because of my dark skin, the question was posed only to me. Since moving to Pasadena, I have taught storytelling workshops for teenagers through the school district. The students, who define themselves as multiracial, increasingly with parents who are both people of color, understand the meaning of intersectionality, as Minal does. I've found that Gen Z teens will claim their identities when asked. If they feel safe, they will name their parents' ethnicities, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, White, Asian, and most add in countries where their parents were born. They list other labels that are important to their identities: queer, trans, non-binary, bisexual, woman, cis. Many also note their passions: athlete, musician, writer, singer, activist, and more. In my writing workshops, students are often looking for paths to tell their stories, which are not reflected in their textbooks. One student, who identifies as white and Japanese, wrote about struggling with how her peers saw her. "Too Asian for the white kids," she wrote, "too white for the Asian kids." Teased nonetheless. But Minal's challenges are unique to her experience. No one else that we know has walked her path as a Chicana South Asian with extended family scattered around the US, Pakistan, India, and the globe. I have no answers for her as she explores where she belongs in a new city. As her mother, I have to trust that she will find answers for herself. For now, Renee and I create opportunities for Minal to connect with family, which we took for granted while growing up. And all I can do is listen to Minal and say, just as I do to my students, you must tell your own story. Over winter break, Minal and I braved Omicron and flew to Karachi for a few weeks. Experiencing the city for the first time as a young adult, Minal spent time with her cousins, one of whom is also biracial and US born, while the other was born in Pakistan and divides her time between the US and Karachi. Minal reconnected with extended family, our house, the markets, and the beach. And though she feels self-conscious when speaking Urdu, she could follow conversations. Late one night, I heard voices from my old bedroom where Minal was with her cousins. I was about to tap on the door to remind her of the early morning outing that she and I had planned. I couldn't tell what the girls were saying, but a peal of laughter cut past the door. I walked away without knocking. Her time in Karachi, Austin, and Southern California, where our family is forging a new trail, might inform her in ways that textbooks never can. So that appeared in February. Thank you. And I thought I would just read a little excerpt just because I'm thinking of travel. And this is from my novel, Black Wings. And coincidentally, these drawings were made by my daughter, Minal. She did not make them for Black Wings, but the designer, the publisher saw the drawings and she fell in love with them and she ended up using them. So this book is told in the voice of two voices. The protagonist is Yasmin, a woman who is cut off from her home, her family in Pakistan. She blames her mother for her twins' death, and she has not gone back to Pakistan. Her story is not necessarily my story, but the novel does move between Pakistan and the US, as most of my work does. And this is right after 9/11, this segment. One afternoon, when I pick up the children from school, Saira's face is streaked with tears, leaving the car double parked with its engine running, something I never do because I am so paranoid about things being stolen before my eyes. I jump out to hug my daughter. The moment we drive away from school, Sam says, "Mom, those boys, they pushed her." And she fell down. I pull the car into the parking strip of a shopping strip along Buffalo Speedway. Holding Saira's hand, I ask her to tell me what happened. She shakes her head. "They told her to go away," Sam answers for his sister, "and they called her mean words. This one boy, he pretend shot her. And then his mom came and got him. I'll take them on tomorrow, I promise." The next day, instead of walking Saira and Sam to the bus, I take the day off and drive to Galveston with the children, and we collect seashells and splash in the water. The children really miss school, but the school year is about to end, and I need a day to cool down before I can talk to the principal again. That evening, after tucking the children to bed, I call Jim and tell him that I plan to take them with me to spend the summer in Karachi. They need to meet their family, I tell him, and they need to get away. "What do you mean, their family?" he says. "That's not safe. I'm going to get a lawyer on this one." I hold the phone away from my ear and let him rant. I know he won't be able to stop me. I am their mother. Plus, through mutual friends, I know that his new partner does not want the children around. I'm going to just jump to the plane where she's about to land in Karachi. The pilot's voice buzzed over the microphones, informing passengers that the airplane would soon land in Karachi. From the window, we saw the city sparkling below us, stretching miles into the desert. On the other side of the lights was the Arabian Sea, over which we had just flown. As we collected our belongings, a bearded man across the aisle fixed his gaze at my sweater and jeans, his disapproval a reminder of what was to come, a country facing growing extremism, a backlash against General Musharraf's alignment with the US and the post-9/11 war in Afghanistan. I returned the man's stare until his eyes slid away. Ahead of us, a German couple strapped on their backpacks. I wondered if they were flying through Karachi on their way to Nepal. No other Western tourists were on the plane. Tourism in Pakistan had died after 9/11 also. The rest of the passengers around us were businessmen, mothers with children, college students returning home for the summer, and laborers from the Middle East. The United States State Department warnings never deterred Pakistani families from returning home. Wheeling our hand luggage, the children and I walked through the chute that connected the airplane to the terminal. The last time that I had been in Karachi airport before flying off to college, passengers had to ride buses and climb stairs to board. Modernization had hit Karachi, and I had missed the transition. The terminal, lit by neon lights, was deserted, except for security guards who stood as straight as the rifles strapped to their sides. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sehba. You said you hadn't read that before, but it flowed so smoothly.
Oh, thank you.
I want to pick up on something that's running through all of the words and poems and stories that we heard today, which was this dichotomy, this rift between places that are struck by calamity or that are, in the midst of such conflict and tension. And yet, as writers and poets and authors, you're writing things that reflect that, but that are also beautiful, that also tell stories that you think are important. And so what goes into your process or your thoughts when you're trying to, are you trying to show both of those things, and how do they relate to one another? And maybe Miriam, we could hear from you first.
Sure. I think thank you for that question. And like Sehba and others have said, thank you for the invitation to be here. It's really wonderful to be with all of you. In answer to your question, what strikes me first is that part of a process is trying to be truthful, and at least in trying to write about the earthquake. So which seems like an oxymoron because I'm writing fiction, so it's not true, but I'm trying to reflect on something that did happen that is a historical fact. And I wanted to show both the horrific nature of the aftermath of the earthquake, but also all the ways in which people came together to help one another, whether it was with first aid or with food or with assistance over time. And then part of a process for me in the writing of a work was to render even the most tragic elements of the story and of what occurred in a beautiful way. Because I think often when people think of a place like Haiti or a place where there's a lot of poverty or duress, they don't think there's any beauty there. So I wanted the language of describing the event and its aftermath to reflect a beauty that is deserving of everyone. Everyone's humanity deserves that kind of beauty and a rendering in beauty, but also that people who are in difficult circumstances also see beauty in each other, in what surrounds them, even when they are surrounded by so much that is difficult. So I think I tried to match the sort of the poeticism of the language with the kind of beauty I wanted to render at the same time being truthful. And the truthful is what creates the balance for me.
Teresa, I was thinking, thank you, Miriam, the balance and the truth being the guiding principle, even in fiction, which is really interesting. Teresa, your poems take us to the site of historical crimes and they devastate us, and yet there's such beauty there in the imagery and in the words themselves. How do you how do you do that?
I try to really be as empathetic and compassionate as possible about the situations. Really try. I know the topics are very heavy and it's full of violence and war and tragic, and also, like Miriam said, there's so much humanity and beauty within that as well. And to make sure that when I am writing about these events to bring out the humanity in the situation, like my mother, the refugees on the boat, even the rainforest, to bring that alive, and also the soldiers. They were very young. So in examining the events, I wanted to look at all sides and be compassionate to everybody. And I think that was a very important part to understand, and hopefully to convey that empathy to the listener and reader.
It's compelling to understand. I mean, that lens on what could be a very sort of, the power dynamic that you're describing is very one-sided and could be compelling to paint it in black and white. But I think you're giving us a lot of extraordinary insight in how you're elaborating that overall. I wanted to.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, growing up, when I heard about the war, I just hear about statistics, and people were just numbers, and we couldn't relate, and people were dehumanized. And I wanted to bring the story in, and so that we're not just a number. And also growing up, watching movies like Apocalypse Now, Ramble, I wanted to make sure that our stories were heard as well.
Lisbeth, I think you're here with us still, because one of the interesting tones that come out of some of your poems is a righteousness and an anger, and I wonder how, are you tapping into that? Is that fuel for you, or what is your relationship to the emotions in your poems, and this, what you've left behind and what you're carrying with you?
There is a lot of emotions when I write about Venezuela. There is guilt, it's like a survivor's guilt. There is the guilt of abundance. Sometimes it's difficult to eat when your family is starving, and it's not starving because it's a poor country. It's starving because of corruption, or that fuels anger. There is no reason why anybody in Venezuela should be starving, one of the richest countries on earth. It's just corruption and mishandling of resources that got the country on its knees, right? It's very small. It's less than 30 million people with an unbelievable wealth under its feet. There is no reason why people should be literally starving. And when I get a WhatsApp message saying that my father weighs 110 pounds, there is nothing I can do with my salary of a part-time teacher to feed my entire family. Although I try, it's difficult. So there is survivor's guilt, there is abundance guilt, there is anger against a government that is not a government, that is simply an impostor, an imposition, an oppressor, a dictator, all the brutal words that you can describe that regime with. And then there is the longing for the homeland that I cannot visit easily because I have an American passport and they will not accept me as an American. I have a Canadian passport and I have to get a visa. But I write openly against this regime. And if I want to enter Venezuela, I have to enter as a Canadian. through a border illegally, and once inside the country, I have to try to get a passport or a permission to get out. And there is no guarantee that I will make it. So it's a longing that I know I will not see my country anytime soon, and my parents are ailing and aging, right? So to speak about what a specific emotion fuels my poetry, I don't know, there is too many of them. There's too many emotions. And then there is this, how do you say this? When you cannot react to something, how do you say that in English? When you are unable to resist what needs resistance. The only thing I can do is write. I have an obligation as an artist to write against the regime. And is and change your point of view, open your eyes if you didn't know about it, or change your point of view if you knew from the other's point of view. So that's the only thing I can do is use my keyboard as a weapon, and that's all. That's all.
Yeah. When we were talking before the event, I remember you were saying that sometimes it's what you're saying is not popular, it's not mainstream, it's a voice from the fringes, and often, you know, that affects whether people hear or not what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, because there is this belief that, and it is unfortunate, because the United States, it doesn't matter what topic we are discussing, still, and I really get angry with America about this. We still see everything on the Cold War dialectics. Even abortion, we see it about leftists and rightists win. No, we have to get out of that dialectic and break down what is the basis of our dialogues or our contradictions, our discussions. So when I have heard other people speak about Venezuela, they see it through this lens of Cold War dialectics. Oh no, this is the left against the right. Or maybe because you're an oligarch that you don't agree with Chavez and whatever.
Yeah.
You don't know how blue collar I am. You don't know where I come from. You don't know that through my early 20s, I went through abject poverty. I mean,
I'm wondering also, hearing maybe now from Sehba, if you don't like this question, then don't bother. But you know, are you also trying to help a misunderstanding audience understand something that they just haven't gotten? I remember when we first met, you talked a lot about transnationalism and this idea of, you know, the fallacy of borders. And I'm wondering if that's something you're writing towards, or if things have shifted for you, especially now that you're incorporating kind of your family relationships into your writing.
I think that's still very much there. You know, I mean, I think that transnational is the safest. If I have to put a label, I resist labels, but if I'm going to put one, I'll use that, because my story is not that of refugees and immigrants. It is not that. I did not come to this country with family. I didn't come with the intention of staying. I just happened to fall in love with a Chicano who also has this interesting border story. And somehow along the way, we figured out like, oh, wow, we have this similar story, you know. And then our daughter is now saying it. So it's really interesting to sort of see how intergenerational this movement is. And a lot of the work in my memoir is also about my mother's story, about what propelled her family to leave. And I think when I began a lot of the work that I was doing in Houston through my social justice organization, social justice arts organization, and also anything that I do through my writing, I realized that I'm doing it to shift the perspective. When people hear that, oh, you're from Pakistan, therefore you must be a practicing Muslim, then they start asking me about all these religious questions, all this stuff, all these assumptions that people make, you know. And I come from a really radical left-wing community in Pakistan. And I'm really grateful for that. And that's my story. Like Lisbeth said, everybody's story is different. We're not all this, just because you come from a nation. I mean, look at Texas and California. It's like two different countries at this moment. I really am thinking of my sisters.
Yeah.
And my
I've been
sisters and my
thinking-
friends' daughters in Houston right now. I mean, how difficult this is. This time.
I don't know if this is a naive question, but I wonder if there's lessons or experiences that that Americans should be learning or should have learned by now from many other places in the world, because our country is no longer seeming like an exception, or it never was, and that myth has shattered, and now, you know, we're seeing a lot of conflict at very basic levels, political, cultural, you know, you name it. And I've always been, you know, it's this this silly thing where you want to be like, well, do you have any advice for us? How do we weather this? How do we resist? How do we subsist? Do any of you have thoughts on you know, resilience, healing, rest? Like, what is it that you're working with? Miriam.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I just remember when my novel just came out, one of the early conversations I had was with NPR, and one of the questions was what have Haitians learned, you know, from the earthquake, from the 2010 earthquake? And my response was, it's not what Haitians have learned, it's what we can learn from Haitians that really matters, you know, because how is it that $16 billion went into Haiti and hasn't made any difference for the average person on the ground? You know, people today are making less money per capita, you know, and this counts millionaires as along with people with no money who are bartering every day, than 2009, the year before the earthquake. People are making less money now than 2009. And so, and when the earthquake happened right after, you know, seismologists said, you know, this is not just about Haiti. It's, you know, these plates are under the Caribbean and they're under the Florida Panhandle and, you know, refract all the way up the eastern seaboard. So people need to be aware of how they will be affected, you know, in years to come. And so it's both being aware of how climate change affects people, you know, disproportionately in different parts of the world, but then also thinking about in places where there is this disproportion, people have persisted, people have, you know, struggled, people are still able to hold their families together despite lack of resources. And we need to think about how the United States is related to other countries in terms of foreign policy, in terms of aid networks that don't work. And so we have a lot to learn, and we can learn by looking at these other countries and how they continue despite interference, political and otherwise. That's what I would say.
Teresa.
I think listening to each other's stories is a huge part in our healing, and listening with empathy. Because there isn't this, you know, there's so much, I think we don't listen so much anymore and try to understand the humanity in each other, and stop falling into the propaganda, the news that we get that influences our opinions and separate us. But listen to each other and try to embrace each other's humanity.
Yeah, that separation is something that exists in our minds. It's persistent, but it is, you know, like all human ideas, open to change.
And also I want to add a little bit. We tend to be subjected to the media, and the media most of the time controls the conversation. And probably the war in Ukraine is the first war that we are living day by day, minute by minute. Like no other before in the world, and mostly because of media and social media. But we should not forget that there are 65 countries in this moment around the world who are suffering wars, oppression, invasions, struggling civil wars, and they are not being looked at by compassionate Americans, compassionate as they may be, because we don't fit the conversation. And we tend to dismiss them, to dismiss all those other wars and all those other conflicts because they don't fit what our ideal should be. I heard in a drugstore a woman saying, and this made me cry in the drugstore, a woman saying, imagine they speak English and they are the ones who are being invaded. And that made me cry. Like, I don't know why. I just couldn't slap the woman. I just cried. And it's like that. I mean, the media controls the conversation in such a way that we are unable to break down what the humanity that we need to see and be compassionate about. And it is when we strip down of discourse, dialectics, preconceptions, and we see conflicts or struggles in what they are, a humanity issue, is when we are able to understand what's going on. And that's it.
I'll just say my final thoughts is that I think compassion, yes, and pursuing and understanding the complexities instead of just going with this one main idea, oh, you're American and therefore you're this, or you're Pakistani and therefore you're this. Or even when I say I was living in Texas and living in Houston and they're like, oh, you were in Texas. Like, no, not really. I was in Houston in my bubble, which was more progressive and more radical than you could ever believe, you know? So I just think that there are all these, we are all human beings are complicated and we share our stories through our writings and we have to learn through each other's work. So that is why writing is so critical. And that's why all of the work that everybody shared today is so beautiful and necessary.
Yes, peer here. Thank you so much, Miriam, Lisbeth, Teresa, Sehba. Thank you, Gloria, for being here, for honoring us, and for educating us. And we will continue this conversation, I think, knowing that all of you have many events coming up and we'll see you around. I do want to just share a little bit of info about our next event in this series, which takes place during LGBTQ Pride Month. I'm very excited about that. It is Pride and Joy in the Matrix, and we will be looking at questions of, can we find joy online? That's an open question, but events like tonight's do give me some hope that despite all of the nasty stuff out there, there's still good reasons we can come together virtually. So please join us. That's going to be June 7th at 6 p.m., same format. It's featuring Isle McElroy, Patrick Nathan, Ruben Teehee Hazlett, all of whom are phenomenal authors. And we're going to have a writing exercise with Amy Spies as well. So again, thank you to our writers tonight, and I wish you serenity, peace, love, all the good stuff. I hope we see each other again soon.